Welcome to Prairie Woods Environmental Learning Center, and welcome to our Pioneer Cabin. Now, this is the homestead of Anders Danielson. Anders Danielson was a pioneer to this area of Minnesota. And to be a pioneer means you do something for the first time or you settle somewhere for the first time. Now, the Danielsons were some of the first settlers here, but they weren't really the first people to live off the land. There were Sioux Native Americans that lived here. They used the land for hunting and fishing. They used the land for their survival. They were here before the pioneers came, before the Danielsons lived here. But when the Danielsons did live here, this area of Minnesota looked very different than it does now. This was mostly tall grass prairie. Now, we do have a restored tall grass prairie on either side of the road. And if you can picture that going miles and miles and miles, the trees that you see now, there are actually more trees now than when the Danielsons lived here. The trees that were here when the Danielsons were here were mostly bur oak. So the landscape was a little bit different. Now, I said the Danielsons were pioneers, were settlers, but they were also immigrants. And to be an immigrant means that you were born in another country and you came to a new country to live the rest of your life. And the Danielsons came from the country of Sweden. I'll show you on my globe. So Sweden is in another continent. It's in Northern Europe. And it's part of a area of countries called the Scandinavian countries. So Finland, Sweden, Norway, Iceland, and Denmark are all part of those Scandinavian countries. So the Danielson family came from Sweden, came across the Atlantic Ocean to the shores of the United States, and then they had to travel halfway across the United States. And you can see right here is the word Minneapolis. So here in Minnesota, coming from the country of Sweden. Now, one thing to think about is, when were the Danielsons here? What time are we talking about? Well, let's figure out when Minnesota became a state. So I'm going to give you a little bit of time to think about it. Do you know what year Minnesota became a state? Well, Minnesota became a state in 1858. So I have a little rhyme for you. 1858, Minnesota became a state. I'll say it one more time. 1858, Minnesota became a state. The Danielsons were living here around 30 years after statehood. So now you're going to have to do a little math there. 1858 plus 30. The year we're talking about is 1888. So that's the time period of our pioneer cabin, 1888. Follow me to the back of the cabin, and I'll show you what's happening back there. Here we have the back of the cabin, kind of the backyard area. This is actually the second house, the second home the Danielsons lived in while they were here. The first home that they lived in was called a sod house. Now, a sod house is basically made out of grasses and dirt. So one of those prairie hillsides, they found a hill and dug a cave out of that hillside. The grasses and the dirt that they dug out became their front wall. And if you were able to go into that sod house, you would have noticed a dirt floor, dirt walls, a dirt ceiling. You could actually have even walked over their roof like you were walking over a hillside. And they lived in that for about a year while they were building this cabin. Now think about building this. It was Anders and Maria, that's the mom and dad, and then 2 children. They built this cabin without any power tools. They didn't have a store that they could run to if they ran out of supplies. They built it with their own hands, with their own materials, with what they had around. And really, that's what being a pioneer was. You had to do it on your own. You had to do it by yourself. And it's kind of neat that this is the site that the Danielsons did that at.